Hello and welcome. In this session today, we'll focus on how Indonesia Stock Exchange IDX is getting ready to host mega tech listings. To shed more light on this, I'm joined by Pandu Sjahrir, Commissioner at the IDX. Welcome, Pandu. It's a pleasure to have
Hi.
you.
Hi. Good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you may be.
Pandu wears many hats. He's a managing partner at Indies Capital, a private credit focused as a fund manager. He's also the chairman of C Indonesia and a board member at Gojek. So he also brings the investor and startup perspectives to this discussion. Let's get started. Bukalapak's $1.5 billion IPO has been a watershed moment for this region. Has it encouraged more investors to participate in the stock market and attracted more startups who may be looking to emulate that success?
Yeah, I think Bukalapak was a good test at the depth of the capital market. I mean, I know there were some questions. I think same time last year whether Indonesia can handle an IPO at a size of, call it $1 billion. Bukalapak was able to raise more than I think the company or the market expected. I think they raised about $1.5 billion, with I think more than 4 times oversubscribed, where majority of it came from institutional investors, foreign investors. I think retail made up 5-7% of that book, which also shows is quite good, right, overall. So I think the success of that, I think it also shows especially for companies that Indonesia can be a very deep market. And, just as a follow-up, we just had the largest rights issue offering in Southeast Asia through BRI, right? Which just recently happened, I think roughly about $3.5 billion of new cash, excluding the government involvement, which is also significant, right? I think year to date, the Indonesian stock market is probably the largest in terms of size that's being offered in the equity market. So, it's been a watershed moment this year that it shows that you can do rights issue, public offering at size, right? So, I think that also excites a lot of companies that's in the technology or new economy to look at Indonesia as a strong alternative.
Sure. How much should we then read into the Bukalapak stock's rather tepid performance since its listing? I mean, the stock's been trading at close to its IPO price. What should we make of it?
No, I think market is just trying to learn more how to value the business. It's the first new economy business that has entered. If I'm not mistaken, the market welcomed the first earning report of Bukalapak, which I think the market view it as positive. Yeah, I think this is just simply the market trying to learn and observe how to value new economy business.
Okay. Despite all that you've said, Traveloka, another local company, is understood to be eyeing a traditional IPO in the US after its merger with the Bridgetown Holdings SPAC fell through. Why do you think an IDX listing is still not the first option for it and perhaps other startups?
No, to be honest, it depends on the company. If you're based out of Indonesia, your operating business out of Indonesia, then I think Indonesia would offer a very compelling reason, especially from a tax front. I think if you are a founder, the selling shareholders only have to pay a 0.5% levy tax once, and then a 0.1% capital gain tax, which is, I think, the most competitive you can find in any market. Also, number two, I think you've seen from the experience this year, there's significant depth into the market. I think it's more just the quality of the business that you're offering, and the market is there, for the taking. And lastly, I think, and more importantly, by listing in Indonesia, there's actually strong stakeholder engagement that you can do, especially if your business, like in our technology, as it grows and grows in its influence in society, stakeholder becomes more important. So being seen as local become more and more important. So that's also another consideration for any companies that are looking at listing. But again, it's a choice for some of these companies. It can also be a structure choice. If they were established, maybe not in other jurisdiction, right? Maybe it's more tax efficient, not just for the founders, but I think from the investors' perspective, that's also something to be considered.
And that brings us to the reforms that IDX and the Financial Services Authority, OJK, have been working on.
Yeah.
We've talked about dual class shares, loosening restrictions on loss-making companies. What's the update on that, and when do we expect these changes to be rolled out?
Yeah, quite soon. I think there's a couple of key things that people are looking at. Number one is voting rights. So, in terms of what are is it a 1 to 30, 1 to 50, 1 to 60, the type of voting rights that's needed for founders, right? I think the concept of founder shares or multiple voting shares is there already. So these are more on the technicalities. Number two, how long does founder shares last? The voting rights, how long will that last? Does it go until the founders decease, the founders leave, or what are the key terms of doing that? And what happened, for example, if there are more rights issuance, for example, in some companies, you do more rights issue. And I think, having a Series A, Series B, Series C is just another word of doing rights issue, right? And different valuation. So that's also another thing that has to be considered. And lastly is in Indonesia is what happened if you are doing dual listing. The technicalities of dual listing, for example, if you list here, how long will it take for you to list out elsewhere? And how do you price it? It's not as simple as that, okay, maybe in Indonesia it's priced at 10. Then do we list it at 10 too in whichever exchange you want to call it, right? And that's something that obviously is a discussion not just between companies, but also with the underwriter community. So that's a little bit of a technicality because it's also so new, right? So that's something that everything is trying to be. It's not going to be perfect, to be honest, but I think it'll be there close to whatever best practices that's out there in the market.
How soon is soon, though?
Soon is soon. It's overtime soon.
Because you talked about dual listing, and of course, GoTo is one of those contenders, and it could be then the watershed moment in that sense of paving the path.
That's right.
You're not committed.
Not sure how to answer. It's not even a statement, so I don't know if I answer or just gonna say yes, ma'am.
Okay. How does the IDX then plan to ensure investor protection amidst all these reforms?
Yeah, that's the most important. In fact, if you ask me, why is if it's taking a little bit more time, is because a lot of thinking happening with respect to investors' protection, right? Do we have to do 100% lockup for all the shares, right? Because that's also a potential risk for retail investors. So our thinking is always the lowest common denominator. Maybe not people that are listening to this conversation, which I assume already is qualified investors. We're talking, the people that the everyday mom and pops or the everyday person that, makes, $500 a month and invest $10 to $15 into a stock. They may not have the same knowledge, right? Those are the guys that we're trying to protect. So these are things. How do we communicate? How do we think about investor protection, making sure disclosure is as good as it gets? And, that's kind of like always the thinking behind this is always how to protect, how to have investor protection. I think that's number one for us.
So retail investors have really jumped onto the stock market bandwagon in Indonesia, and it's unprecedented. 1 million new equity investors started trading in the first 8 months of this year. How critical is retail participation, and how do you plan to further boost it?
Well, boosting, number one, we've been so surprised. I think this is like post-COVID, everybody gets into the action, which is really cool. On average, the average age is 25 and pretty split into half, men and women. They're young, I think smart, want to grow their capital base, even though I think the average income is still relatively small, but we look at it as customers that can be with us for the next 30 to 40 years, right? So our job has been communicating, and the communication has moved we're no longer just using, I think, media such as yourself. We got to use online media. We got to use social media. Social media has been significant growth, right? I mean, we have there's about 120, 130 that we know of, micro influencers and large influencers, and even the largest celebrities in Indonesia now are even talking about stocks. And how do we think about doing that, right? So it's funny because now there's an ecosystem talking about stocks or public market as a strong alternative for investment. In my generation, I'm not that old, but in my generation, we always talk about investing in real estate, right? Investing in, other things. But really this recent surge, investing in public stocks the last 1 year has been super welcoming. And now in terms of how to grow that momentum, we gotta always communicate. Another thing too is thanks to the new economy, the new technology, there's a lot of new players that are looking to increase this by growing their total addressable market of the stock market. So today the stock market is about 1.5 to 1.8% of total population. So it's good. Last year was below 1%. So it's significant growth. Now the question is, can you go to where, similar to developed markets, where you can have more than half of the population? And I think that's why a lot of investors are super excited looking at Indonesia, either through the capital market or through the private market, investing in some of these new technology players, right, that are looking to become a broker, asset manager into the Indonesian capital market by growing the TAM, right, by getting new subscribers, new people. And we welcome that. It's, for us, it adding new flows, new things. And I think our job is to work together with these technology players to help educate the market the right way, right? So make them learn. So, we're actually quite excited about the development. I think we're just starting and hopefully getting to that inflection point where, in tech terms, hockey stick, right? Hockey stick type of increase.
What sort of targets do you have in mind for increasing the penetration?
We changed the target, always wrong, right? And thankfully, it's wrong to the upside instead of wrong to the downside. But, just to give a color, every month, we're adding almost about every day, 5 to 10,000 new subscriber in a way, or new people, new single identification into the capital market. It's not big amount, not big wallets, but what matters is that they're starting, they're entering, and once they see successes, they're gonna start increasing that wallet, right? So I think that's important for the capital market. Having more knowledge about investing in stocks or in other things in the capital market will only be positive, right? And we see it because they're young, they're gonna be there for a while, 25 years old, right? So some time to grow.
There's an audience question on what you just said. So social media plays an important role in making stock investing popular.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any risk for these influencers to pump those stocks up?
Of
And
course,
how do you
that's
deal with
the
that?
first thing that what people do. So that's so top of mind because it's not unique. It's happened in other markets. They use Reddit. They use other places. Here in Indonesia, the biggest one is Instagram. That's what people use the most. So, we don't have a regulation yet regarding this because it's so brand new. What we've done essentially is we called all the biggest celebrities in Indo that are talking about stuff. There's like 30 of them. The biggest one is like 5 or 6. And, they have like 60 million Instagram followers. It's like significant, like 60, 70. And we said, hey guys, you guys are at the top of your game. You're the best of the best. Make sure whatever you're doing, because you're quote unquote influencers, you influence. People usually don't ask questions by the things you say. Make sure that you're doing the right thing. So for example, if you're looking at stocks or somebody is asking you to promote some stock, make sure it's a company you want to associate with, right? And they have, as long as you guys have power, pricing power, you have negotiating power, everything. Make sure you're associating with the right set of things, right? Or the right set of companies. So we use moral persuasion a bit, just to start with. We've seen some cases where there are micro influencers doing it. From large scale influencers, I think they've been the way we ask is that if you're talking about a stock, just say two things. Are you getting paid by it? And or do you own it, right? And from there, people can make their own decision, right? Because don't forget, if anything goes wrong, people never blame themselves. They will blame the influencers. And then, of course, the stock exchange. So, it's always rule of law, rule of life, right? If something goes wrong, you're gonna blame others, especially if you don't know it. And that's kind of like the moral obligation you need. But frankly speaking, we're watching it closely. If it becomes a systemic risk, then obviously, or become a risk that we think needs to be regulated, that's going to be under consideration.
Okay, we've talked about retail investors. How do you plan to draw more institutional investors? Because this higher retail participation raises the risk of market volatility.
Yeah, well, it's always increasing, always good, but our job is to actually bring more larger scale companies into the market. I think that's important. So not just relying on, for example, the rights issue that just recently happened with BRI, which is also super awesome. I mean, it's significant. I mean, they did more than $3.5 billion in a single issuance, right? But I think there's going to be a couple of more IPOs, I think at about $1.5 billion and $1 billion plus in the, what is it called? One renewable business, which is super exciting. One is in the digital infra business, which is also super cool. And then obviously some of the new tech, right? I think if you look at overall composition, technology globally, right, has played a bigger part in the composition of the capital market. In Indonesia, it's just started, right? But if you look at the private market investment into Indonesia has been the biggest in Southeast Asia the last 5 years, right? Now, how do you convert that into public market? And I think the good thing is now, because if you look at private market investment in Indonesia, it's about 8-year period now, right? 7-8 year period. So 2013, 2014 is what most venture capital started. I think we started around that time, but it's kind of cool. It's near the gestation period of investment. So I think you're gonna see a lot of flux into the public market. I think you will have more attraction by institutional investors, both domestically and from foreign, right? I mean, if we kind of put it like this last two IPO and rights issue, the majority came from foreign investors, which is good and very welcome. And we need to do more of that. So not just getting more demand side, right, from both retail and institution, but it's our job to get bigger and bigger supply, larger and larger companies. We call it last year chasing elephants. So we got to chase elephants into the business.
And we have a related audience question. MSCI China is a quarter tech weighted, while MSCI Indonesia is 0 tech weighted. How much do you think IDX can be comprised of tech?
Yeah, so MSCI
15%?
MSCI, after the recent listing, etc., you got to move it into an LQ. We call it LQ45, which is a top 45 companies weighted, generally by market cap, and also the I forgot like the multiple voting shares and the stuff that we discussed about accommodating tech companies into the main board is also talking about that, right? Losses, etc. We said, okay, we can weigh that vis-a-vis the growth of the equity, as well as the growth of the sales of these businesses, right? So if you have that, some of the companies that are still quote unquote loss making can also enter the main board, right? So we also want to, I mean, this is not necessarily just to talk about the Buka or the Goto, but other potential companies, right? That will be there. So we have to make the rules fair for everyone. Now, in terms of weighting, there's no real hard weighted, or is that 30%, 40%, because it's reflected in the market itself. My guess, I think by end of year, MSCI weighting, well, it'll probably be early next year, because it takes about 8 months, 6 to 8 months for MSCI, for the LQ45 to come in, and then MSCI to come in. So it'll be probably 6 to 8 months for that the weighting to start, and the technology companies start to come into that index. And the percentage, I think definitely higher than 0. So it'll be there. I don't have a weighting, but it'll get there, and I think it's gonna be a welcome addition. So I'm trying to answer the question by not answering a specific number.
All right. We also have another interesting question. 3x more Indonesians are trading in crypto when compared to the equity markets. Is this a concern?
So, okay, I mean, this is one I'm super interested to discuss. Probably need a different fireside chat. Crypto is now about 8 million, to be honest. I think roughly that's the numbers that have been told to me. Also young people. So essentially, he or she probably have a capital market account and probably have a crypto account. And is it a concern? I see it both as an opportunity, but also something to be watched over closely. And the reason is this. If it becomes more and more significant part of your society, then you have to start thinking of how to potentially regulate. So in terms of blockchain and crypto, I understand the concept. I get it, right? And to be honest, personally, I welcome the opportunity, right? But in terms of making sure that the everyday person understand the risk, that's also something that I think every person that's in the regulation side and the government side has to also strongly consider, right? Because there's no real regulation out there globally, right? So we look at what's happening in the US, we look at what's happening in China. I guess that's the two places we can look at. We obviously look at our neighboring country, Singapore, but obviously Singapore are much wealthier society, but also much smaller, right? I mean, it's 6 million, 3.9 million population or citizens plus foreigners, so it's about 6 million. Indonesia, I mean, I mentioned 8 million, and that's just started the last 15 months, 18. So that's bigger than Singapore today, right? So the question is, how should we think about it? How should we go about it? Is it a concern? I think the regulators are really looking at this now much closer. Right now, it's under the Ministry of Trade, right? Just fine under Bapepti. I think if it concerns fiat currency, and the question is this a commodity or a fiat currency, right? And if it's under fiat, then central bank and OJK should also be looking at it, right? Or should be under them. So, but again, to be honest, everyone is watching this development closely. That's probably the best answer for it right now. But we understand also the risk that is happening across the countries, especially quote unquote potentially things that may be related to fraud, money being spent elsewhere, things of that can be of scale, right? So that's something that we're all watching very closely.
I'll take one more audience question before going back to the discussion. I believe this attendee probably came in a little late, so they missed the earlier part of our conversation, but I'm going to use this to get a definitive answer from you. Is it fair to expect the new regulations regarding dual class shares and others to be announced later this year?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Inshallah. That's probably the right way to say it.
All right, let's talk about SPACs. Singapore allowed the listing of blank check firms earlier this month, and the IDX was also looking at allowing these listings. Where do things stand at the moment? Yeah,
we're looking and we're focusing a lot on this multiple voting shares. And I think after that, we will be focusing on the SPAC, right? Because SPAC, I think it's a good alternative, especially to companies based in this part of the world that are not yet. I mean, I think if you look at the US, you got to be a minimum size market cap, at least 2 to 3 billion minimum for it to even matter a bit, because the market is that deep in the US, right? So Indonesia can play a role for markets that's smaller than that. So whatever it's 300 million to 2 billion, that's probably the right market cap for companies to list in our stock market. And the good thing is, because if they are in this market, there's also more name recognition, right? So I think that will be a subsequent follow-up.
And when should we expect the announcement? When is?
No, I think most likely it will be a next year's discussion on this.
Okay, all right. SGX has also announced new initiatives, including state-backed funds to boost its stock market. Can we expect a similar initiative in Indonesia?
I think more my view is not necessarily from a demand side. I think my strong push will be on the supply side, having really awesome companies list in Indonesia. That's probably the biggest thing that we need to focus on, right? So our job is to promote the benefit of the capital market and how we can improve the capital market, right? Because the market really has changed from say 2 years ago to today, or I think we listen a lot to our customers, we've always been, but now we're using different ways of doing it, not just meetings, we're using these type of events, we're using social media to a large extent, right? And we're also using what is it called? Personal approaches to companies. So we are, in a way, from the board, the management, we are very proactive, meeting companies, right? And we would meet companies every day to talk to them about the capital market. So, that's a good thing, being very proactive, being very forward-looking, because I would say this year has been a stellar year for the Indonesian Stock Exchange, and we are hoping that next year we got to prepare the pipeline too, right? So that's kind of, with good successes, sometimes you always want to step up the game. That's kind of like the rule of law in a way, but for us, it's that's the challenge and that's the excitement. Now, in terms of state-backed funds, it will be good to have, but our job is that if there's good companies, the capital will be there. I'm less worried about capital. I'm more worried about really having awesome companies being in the public market in Indonesian Stock Exchange.
Since you talked about that, the Indonesian government is also seeking to raise capital by listing some of the state-owned enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of investor demand do you expect for these SOEs versus the younger tech companies?
I think if it's really good, I think there will be strong demand. So, when I mentioned to our Minister of State-Owned Enterprise, as well as the vice ministers, the good thing is they also come from private sector. Pak Erick Thohir knows it really well. We're having awesome companies, right? And also both Pahala as well as Pak Pahala and Pak Tiko, they were at Mandiri before. They know what it means about having a really good market reception. So I think extremely aligned. That's probably the right word. So you would expect some of these companies to be really good ones, really strong ones. And I know for one of them already, they already got a bid for the entire book. So I'm pretty sure it's gonna be well covered, right, before they go public. So this is gonna be $1.5 billion type of IPO, right? So almost Bukalapak size. So I'm pretty excited by that.
Okay. There is another question on Bukalapak on whether it will be included in the MSCI Indonesia Index in November.
November, I gotta check, to be honest. It's just timing. I think more because given the market cap, etc., and also the size of the IPO, I don't see any reason not to be there. But again, just timing wise, I can't answer it, to be honest. I need to check. I'll come back.
Okay. As the regulatory crackdown in China continues, it's likely to drive asset managers to other destinations. Do you think the IDX could benefit from what's happening there? There was a view that it definitely drove up some demand for Bukalapak.
I think it drives demand from the private market. So we saw in the private market, my real job actually is in investment. This is kind of like, this is my, I do this really for the country. But in the private sector, you see a lot of demand coming in for private market companies, right? The public market side is actually more about supply. But in the private market, you're seeing significant flow coming in from mostly institutional investors coming from the US, Europe, coming into our part of the world. And I think the thesis is very simple. If you look at any countries in the world, Indonesia may be one of two that both US and China wants to have influence in. I'll repeat it again. Like everywhere in the world, Indonesia is one of probably two countries in the world with significant size in terms of population, total addressable market, where both US and China wants to have influence in, right? So they're fighting, everyone is fighting through capital, right? So we have benefited tremendously from that, and you're seeing it in the private market. And I don't expect less when it comes to the public market side. So it's more about momentum and driving bigger and bigger companies to list into the Indonesian Stock Exchange. And it's a good thing because you can have both investors. You've seen it's one of the very rare places where you can have cap table filled from investors coming from from China as well as from the United States, which is cool, you know.
Okay. You mentioned a renewable firm and a digital infrastructure player again earlier that are seeking to list and raise about the same as what Bukalapak has done. Who are these? Can you share more details?
You can read it in, and I think you can read it through DealStreetAsia. That's how you should find it, and subscribe, and you know, and be a loyal subscriber, and you'll find it first.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that plug. Indonesian firms have raised a record $2.26 billion in the local market, stock market this year. This is from Bloomberg. Do you think?
I think bigger now because of the IPO or the rights issue as well.
And this was prior to the rights issue. Yes.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's that number. I think it's bigger because I think it's only one or two companies that they quoted on that. But okay, it's fine. It's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Could 2022 top this? And what other listings apart from GoTo can we expect?
Man, it's relentless. It's like we're trying to finish the year first. And I think next year, what you will see, think about some of the technology businesses that are 2013, 14, 15 vintages, right? And they're probably at the right age, 7, 8 years to start considering public market. And we are talking to some of them to list, right? You are seeing also significant rights issue that probably will happen among the digital banks, right? Simply because of regulatory requirement to increase capital. So you'll see more of that, and there's a bit of a trend, I think, in the digital bank, the buy now pay later businesses, or those that are in the P2P business. I think they're all converting into either digital bank license or multi-finance license, where they'll see that the public market is probably the most efficient place to raise capital. So you're seeing that. And also in the logistics side, right? And the e-commerce logistics, some companies now have grown to the size where they probably they merit consider to be listed in a stock exchange. Whichever stock, but in a stock exchange, because they're probably worth billions of dollars today. So yeah, that's kind of where the market is going. And yeah, I'm still very excited about this year, not let alone next year, but this year I'm still excited. We still got like 3 months, right? 4 months to go.
Taking another audience question, with increase in retail participation, will we see more unicorns in the wealth tech or wealth management space? India, China, and the US have several unicorns here. And of course, DealStreetAsia has reported that Sjahrir is set to be a unicorn soon. So before you answer that, how critical has been the role of wealth management startups to the boom that we've seen in investor participation, retail investor participation? And second, what does this mean for companies in this space?
So maybe the right answer is actually they're really helpful to the stock exchange regulators because they're there to help people to manage their wealth, right? So I think it's a lot of education and communication that they're giving to the market. And I think that's number one. Number two is also how are you able to manage your capital over time? If you talk about asset management business, it's not just about getting that customer, it's how to retain that customer over time. And that's the most important. That's how you make money out of this, right? Over the next 10 years, can I earn enough from fees, etc., and by managing that capital and grow their capital. So I view it as a positive development, welcome development. And In fact, as the capital market grows and there's more offering, not just public equity, but through, other instruments, debt, and others, right? That will actually increase the addressable market and also the size of the pie. So the argument is this, and I think it's probably similar to the names you're being mentioned. The market and the pie is still relatively small. Only 1.5% of the population has an account. And in typical, their wallet is still relatively small. If we can go even half of what the developed markets are, so call it 25%, you're seeing a growth of 15 times from where it is today, 15, 20 times. And then over that time too, the wallet will grow, right? So imagine if the average wallet is only 200, 300 US. Imagine if that grows over time to become 3,000 US. So you're seeing two multiples. The wallet grows 10x, and then obviously above grows 15 to 20x. And that's how TAM increases, right? And also the value, right? Or the value of the overall pie increases. So I think that's why there's excitement over it. And I think, asset management will be one of the ultimate beneficiaries of this, right? And this is a welcome addition.
Another audience question. We're seeing some of the Indonesian companies, especially those under $1 billion in valuation, abandoning plans for listing abroad and looking at IDX. Does it make sense for smaller companies or even larger companies to look abroad anymore for listings?
I think if you're already at $1 billion, this is not valuation. It depends on the company too. Are you ready to be listed? And most people would just say, if I get good value, I will list, etc. But being a listed company is both positive and there's also some drawbacks. One, you have to be very transparent. Are you ready to be transparent? And there's costs associated with that, reporting costs, etc., which is given. Number two, you'll be under public scrutiny more of the time. Like, for example, probably in DealStreet, you're probably pulling hair trying to find out numbers from some of these private companies, right? Well, if you're in public, you're not going to be pulling hair. People are going to start analyzing you back and forth about any general numbers, including, for example, that some people always worry about compensation. What are the compensation of this? What's the ESOP of this? What's the number? Are you ready to be having public scrutiny, right? So you need a level of maturation. And I'm not saying maturation of the individual, but maturation of the company. You have strong governance. When you talk about governance, a lot of the private companies, most of your board are probably investors into you. Have you had independent board members, right? And that's also important, right? For example, if you have an ex-regulator as your board member, their viewpoint may not just be, how do I increase valuation today? Their view may be, hey, this may have a strong view by regulators. You should not do it, even though it may look like good business in the short term. So it becomes more complex being public. You have to think not just about public scrutiny and openness, but you also have to think, are you mature enough as a company to list? And usually on average, it takes 8 years, 7, 8 years now for companies on average. I'm not talking the special ones, some maybe do it 3 years for you, but on average, 8, 9 years, right? For you to become mature enough to become public. So that's a question everyone should ask themselves,
Definitely.
Anyway, actually it's interesting because that's probably the most discussion, the most number of discussions I've had was with our founders is whether they should go public or not. Separate fireside chat.
Definitely. One final question before we close. Big picture question. The IPO run in Indonesia, is it because these companies are great, or is there a bull market? Or is it that, and this is an audience question, is it that many of the companies come into the market have a scarcity value?
Yeah, so it's a bit weird because I think the Indonesian public market is done okay, but not yet relatively as strong as, say, compared to the US or even China, even with the correction. And the reason being is that we haven't had many new economy coming into the public market, right? So it's a bit different, right? Yes, everybody asks, what's the weighting, etc. Imagine the MSCI for China is 25%. The US is probably either the same. I mean, if you look at top 10 in the US, 9 out of top 10 are technology related. The new economy is the economy there, right? The existing economy is called the old economy. And what's interesting in Indonesia, if you look at the largest companies, they haven't changed a lot the last 10 years. Only now is beginning to shift, right? The shift is actually happening this just the last 12 months. And that's welcome. So what's happening is there's a little bit of quote unquote reallocation of capital from quote unquote the old economy moving into this new economy. But the most important is it's just lack of supply. So once supply comes in, there is a scarcity issue. That's probably the biggest one, my view. So once more companies come in, people will reallocate capital accordingly. Because I always believe capital market or public market is much deeper than private market. Typically is, right? Because accessibility. So yeah, if you talk about Indonesia in particular, once you get this more and more of these public companies that represent new economy, I think there's very positive momentum. And when you talk about the bull market globally, etc., I can't comment. I'm just saying that Indonesia public market just have very small weighting among the new economy, and that's just time. I think the next 6 to 12 months you'll see, inshallah, more positive development there.
All right, that's all the time we have for this session. Thank you so much, Pandu.
Thank you.
And thank you to the audience.
Thank you, and have a good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you may be. Thank you for doing this.